Nice.
All right, hello everyone. We remember the loss today, the lost lives of COVID-19. But we also remember our civil rights leaders who had paved the way, honoring C.T. Vivian and John Lewis. A question that I have for young leaders are who are willing to fill those boots? And as we remember those who have lost their lives to COVID-19, we honor those families and those who are currently have tested positive and those who are recovering. We offer our prayers and strength. 181 locals lost in Santa Clara County alone to COVID-19, and a combined 131 Americans have been lost nationwide to COVID-19. Violence and capitalism trap America in a strong, destructive cycle, birthed by a terrorist takeover of stolen natives, built on brutal trade of Africans, stolen and beaten, criminalized, dehumanized, all for free labor. A global power shaped in blood and violence. As we fast forward over 400 years, and as we face a global, fatal unseen virus and economic demise, we seize this moment, we take this moment, we demand this moment to call for a moral new deal. We take this time, this moment to call for an anti-racist economy. As we look at our national budget, our state, city, and county budgets, to repair the breach of white supremacy, bigotry, and racism. As we imagine freedom from the double pandemic of racial injustice, COVID-19, and as I like to call it as well, COVID-45, we turn to look beyond economic recession to create a society safety net, a societal safety net that curates national financial tools only wielded by the rich today. We seek to build a stable structural system that affords access to financial liberation for Black, Indigenous, Brown, and all impacted communities. Thank you for joining us today for the Justice Project. Supported by over 100 faith, tribal, and clergy leaders, we all stand together to call for equity and justice for all people. In the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr., and we listen to understand as authentic civic leaders share how moral courage can lead to a change in Santa Clara County and all of the cities therein. We seek to lead by courage with confidence of listening to those who are most impacted. So again, we thank you and we welcome you. I'm Reverend Ray. I am the Executive Director at PACT, which is People Acting in Community Together. We are a multi-faith, multicultural organization who develop leaders to speak truth to power. We demand economic justice for all. We call to dismantle structural financial oppression. We stand to protect the marginalized. We push officials, financial institutions, venture capitalists, angel donors, and employers to get on board to denounce systemic racism and to construct a new social contract so everyone can thrive and enjoy economic liberation and have the same quality of life, to be seen as equal, to be seen as ourselves. So welcome again, our civic leaders and servant leaders to the Justice Project. Welcome everyone. How are all of you doing?
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good. So happy to have all of you, and we're grateful. So right off the bat, I want to introduce one of, I call the Bay Area superstars, and one of the brilliant economical thinkers Solana Rice. So Solana, can you introduce yourself, rep your organization, and let the folks who are live on Facebook and Zoom know what's giving you gas in this COVID crisis moment?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Reverend Ray. At first, when you said superstars, I was like, who's going to be on the call? Who's coming on? Thank you so much. I'm Solana Rice. I live in Oakland and so happy to be here with you all. Just so impressed and thankful and grateful for the work of PACT. I am the co-founder and co-executive director of Liberation in a Generation. We're a national movement support organization, and we say that we are here to create a new economy, a liberation economy, one that dismantles economic oppression and one that builds liberation for Black people, Latinx people, Asian Americans, Indigenous people, all people of color. And we do that by supporting organizing groups like yours and others in the Faith in Action Network and groups across the country in building out strong, robust, transformative policy platforms that really put our leaders on the hook for delivering economic liberation for people of color. So I'm just so excited to be here. I'm happy to say more about Liberation in a Generation, but I do want to say what's giving me hope, what's giving me fuel. It has been a long day today, I will admit. But I think what's giving me hope is that enough people have been saying that change is around the corner. I do think that this pause that we have taken because of COVID has ushered in a new moment where we're saying, you know what, there's just a lot broken. There's a lot that has always been designed to be broken for people of color. This economy is shattered, and we as people of color are often navigating the sharpest edges of this economy and always have been, and the economy has been designed that way, and so there is no putting the pieces back together. There's no going back to normal, and I am hopeful that more people are awakening to that. I think we have a long way to go to recognize what that actually means in practice and how to operationalize that, but I'm happy that we're at the doorstep, we're at the threshold of something different.
Hey, I'm really looking to hear more about it. There's nothing better than pinning down those stakeholders and electeds to do the right thing. So we look forward to this great conversation with you. Next up, we have a phenomenal sister who is shaking and moving in San Jose and Santa Clara. Ms. Lisa Riley, introduce yourself to the people, your organization, and what is giving you gas during this time of COVID and crisis.
I'm pumped up from hearing Solana. Thank you, Solana, for that. I'm Lisa Riley, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today because we have a lot to do. And I have a 501c3 called Odo Synergy Services, 1 Degree of Separation, Women of Color, Global Entrepreneur Network. And I started the nonprofit in 2019 because I left corporate America after 17 years. I was fed up, sick and tired, and I wanted to change. I wanted something different. And I wanted to become an entrepreneur, but it was a hard journey, and there was no funding and no resources. And the services that are out here that said they could help me and get me funding, well, they couldn't help me. And so I know a lot of women like me that are getting laid off from corporate America. They are sick and tired. They want to transition. They got side gigs and they need help. And I took on this role to move beyond my fear. Right, to transition out of corporate because it was a cushy job. I had a nice 9 to 5. I had a nice salary. I had a nice 401k, but I had to shift and I had to make a mindset shift. And so my organization, which is a membership organization, a global membership organization, is established to provide resources and tools for Black and Brown women of color who want to shift. who want to transition and move beyond their fear and use their gifts to create phenomenal businesses. And in the midst of the pandemic, we've seen a significant increase in the small home-based businesses, the sisters at home in their kitchen making the mask, and they're making the different types of products and services. And they had been gone unnoticed, and they did not get support around the PPP and the idle funding. And so we are looking to provide information and resources for underserved, diverse women of color, micro businesses targeting $50,000 and under, because a lot of these women are making less than $50,000. And so we want to see and advocate for those women in the state of California to help them get funding and resources. And we're going to be working on tools and projects. We're talking to the governor's office, the GoBiz, entrepreneurship department. We're partnering with them to get information and education out. We want to educate women on government contracts. We're working with the Department of General Services, PTAC, SBA. My board member is on the state of California SBA. We want to teach women about government contracts, but we want to provide equitable funding for women of color in the state of California. So we're going to be putting together petitions and requesting support over the next year in that space. And we're also global. We have sisters around the world that have left the United States. They're still United States citizens, and they created businesses and services outside of this country. And so we want to build a global network, a global coalition in the sisterhood to share resources and information and show women what the possibilities are outside of this country in case they might want to pivot and leave this country. So we have a big Black Global Expat forum coming up, entrepreneur forum coming up this Saturday, where we have almost 100 women signed up for the forum to talk about doing your businesses outside of the United States. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the issues? What are some of your successes? And what are you feeling in respect to the racial disparity of family and friends here in the United States? And we want to talk about post-COVID-19. What happens after? Generate some ideas, because I believe that we're in a cleansing. We're in a renewal process right now. And the universe is saying, okay, this is your opportunity to create something new and fantastic. And so I want to get your support, and we pull together as a coalition, empower one another to empower these women, empower these small businesses in our state, nationwide and globally if possible. So that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Right on, Lisa. Thank you so much. Racial equity. It's not about an ask, but it's about we're demanding this. All right, the next two gentlemen we have is Mario and Matthew. Mario is a very creative individual that is working not only with looking at how do we create affordable housing in San Jose, but Mario and Matthew are working with this demand of the commercial linkage fee, where companies and corporations come off of corporate welfare and contribute financially their fair, responsible financial offering to the community. So I'd like to introduce Mario, and then Mario, you can introduce your counterpart, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reverend Ray, for inviting us this afternoon to be part of this really critical conversation about race equity as it relates to housing and homelessness within the state of California, given the climate that we're in the midst of a public health pandemic. And so my name is Mario Lopez. I'm sorry, I'm not the famous actor, but you know, I do work for an organization that is really dedicated to addressing the lack of affordable housing throughout Silicon Valley. We are Silicon Valley at Home, that is our organizational name, and we work with for-profit and nonprofit property developers to ensure that the projects that they are proposing within the communities are equitable to the neighborhoods that they're trying to be good neighbors in as well. And so we work with policy stakeholders at the top level, but also with some of them to push equitable policies to ensure that we are not doing harm to any communities that are already disproportionately affected by the lack of affordable housing. And so one of the biggest things that we're really focusing on here within Santa Clara County, in partnership with a number of other civic stakeholders like Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, is really trying to ensure that the eviction moratorium that the city of San Jose and other local jurisdictions within the county, because the county also adopted its own eviction moratorium, that the residents that stand to benefit the most from these policies are actually being informed about them. And so when the city of San Jose actually it was the Santa Clara County announced their eviction moratoriums, we held 3 different webinars so that residents that speak in Spanish or in Vietnamese were also informed, in addition to the English webinar that we held. And we continue to ensure that we provide multilingual content and resources to ensure that everyone's aware about their rights as tenants. And so, there's another partner organization that recently came out with a report indicating that we're in the middle of an eviction time bomb. And so how do we address that? Because of the Black community and the Latinx community were already rent burdened prior to COVID-19. They were spending more than 50% of their income, working multiple jobs, maybe 3 jobs at a time, trying to sustain a household for themselves and for their family members, and not having the financial resources to even cover food expenses, utility expenses, or even medical expenses. And now you add this public health pandemic on top of them, and it's just devastating entire communities. And when you look at the actual data of who's been affected the most for public health wise because of the pandemic are Black and Brown communities, and particularly here in East San Jose. And that's a big issue that we're really trying to address by ensuring that people who are affected remain in their homes, because housing is now a health issue, right? If we are able to house everybody, then we're able to contain this public health pandemic as much as possible. And so we're very fortunate to be able to work with city stakeholders to be as responsive as we can to our communities. And we're very happy to be part of this conversation. And I want to introduce my colleague, Matthew Reed, who's our policy manager and has been wonderful in terms of being able to uphold our policy advocacy and priorities to ensure that our Black and Brown communities are continuing to be prioritized and uplifted. Matthew, you're muted.
Thank you, Mario. It's an honor to be part of the discussion. Rev Ray, I really appreciate you including us in this process. I think for us, it's a moment of kind of rage and reflection. There was nobody in San Jose who's been involved in responding to community issues and has been looking at the housing crisis in our city that can say that they are surprised by where we find ourselves today. And so the question is, are we also able and willing to make that next step to take collective responsibility for what lies ahead? These are incredibly complicated times for individuals, for families, for communities. And I think part of our challenge as members of the civic community is to really be proactive, to empower people with knowledge. There's a tremendous amount of fear and uncertainty, as Mario mentioned. The question of how you're going to stay in your home when you lost your job, or one of the 3 jobs in your household that is allowing you to remain in this city, which is really not accessible to a lot of the folks that live here. It's a constant struggle. These are things we had before, and in this moment, it's all just being magnified. So it's super, super, super important to get information out, and it's really important that we have the tools in place. But I just want to draw attention to that. You can create great tools and brilliant policies, and if people are not using them, they don't have the knowledge and they're not empowered, particularly in relationships with landlords. We're very worried about this. So it's a mixture of empowering and educating communities about their rights and in creating policies that are responsive to what the needs are. The pandemic has also not, I don't know how you say this nicely. It's not a surprise. We map really closely with where we have overcrowded households and where we're seeing people getting sick. And, when you push 7 or 8 folks into a 3-bedroom apartment, somebody's got to work and they're going to come home and everybody's at risk. And for us, it really shows that affordable housing that people can afford and that is sustainable and safe and healthy is critical to the resilience, not just of families, but of communities. And we're hoping that lesson is something that I think people are seeing and that we can build on moving forward. So I'm not quite where Lisa is. I'm still suffering with a lot of pain and angst, but I do think this is a moment in which full throttled engagement and pushing forward does present opportunities. And I know, Reverend Ray, that you all have been doing a tremendous amount of work in the city, and we've appreciated the partnership. But boy, it's going to be a long haul. This is something we're going to be struggling with for a while.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is we are really gearing up our campaign efforts to pass a commercial linkage fee within the city of San Jose to secure a local source for funding for the production of additional affordable housing. I think Working Partnerships came out with a recent study that showed that more than 212,000 Santa Clara County workers had filed for unemployment since the start of COVID-19, and those are primarily people of color. And so we want to be as responsive to that as possible. And we see that this commercial linkage fee campaign that we're gearing up for, it will play a crucial role in COVID-19 economic recovery efforts. So without further ado, I'll hand it back to you, Reverend Ray.
All right, thank you, Mario. So thank you, Solana, thank you, Lisa, Mario, and Matthew, as we dive in. But before I do that, I just want to pause for a moment of prayer reflection. This reflection is to call on a spirit of love, call on the spirit of faith, for which those who listen within our faith community share, where we're in a right relationship with our Creator, a right relationship with one another, and a right relationship with our earth and environment. So I just pause to give thanks for this moment, for these amazing individuals who have come to share, to impart wisdom and knowledge, to inform, to encourage, and to plan. So in the spirit of love and faith, I invite all that is good to overcome the challenges that we are in the name known by many names of love and faith, Ashe, Shalom, and peace, and Salam Alaikum to all. All right, so Solana, we got a lot to dig into, and we're going to talk about in the areas of housing, even the idea of defunding the police, reimagining policing, what we do from an economic structure, small business, housing, health. So I'd like you to lead the way, and I've just handed you the ball. You are the chief strategist, the chief economist, the chief fiscal planner. How do you lead us through all of this with your models and philosophy?
Yeah, thank you, Reverend Ray. And that's a tall order. My first response is by gathering like this, right, with other people. And I will say that some of the things that Lisa was saying really resonated with me, because just a little bit about myself. I grew up outside of Cleveland, Ohio. We talked a little bit about this. I'm actually a city planner by training and an architect. And what I realized in my studies was that I wanted to create affordable housing, back to the work of Mario and Matthew. And I realized that we weren't, like, the cities that I was living in, and honestly, this entire nation was not ready to really create housing for everyone, especially people that look like me and my families. And so I just kept trying to dig and sort of follow the money, right? Why are we not creating opportunity for everyone in this country. And I worked for national nonprofits and was enjoying my work, but feeling like there was more to do. And so what Lisa was saying, feeling like I had to let go of that fear of starting something new. And that's why, in part, we started Liberation in a Generation. My colleague, Jeremy Greer, who is based on the East Coast, we left Prosperity Now. And it was shortly after we had just created the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative. And this ties back to the work of both what Lisa and Mario and Matthew will talk about in a bit too. But, you know, the racial wealth gap is steadily growing and will absolutely be cemented because of COVID-19, unless we do something different. So some of the statistics that we were generating were things like it will take 228 years for Black wealth to meet that of white wealth, should white wealth stay the same. And we know that white wealth is not going to stay the same from here on to 228 years from now. Latinx wealth follows shortly behind there, maybe like about 200 years. Anyway, we know that that's way more than our lifetimes. We also know that by the middle of this century, by 2050, Black and Latinx median wealth will be zero. So my Jeremy and I looked at each other and we said, we are doing really important policy work and we're not hitting the mark. We do not feel like we are doing all that we can with all of our capacity and devices and all of our strength to really change those statistics. So it was time to lay down the research, lay down all the ways that we had looked at the racial wealth gap. And we started Liberation in a Generation to do three things: to support movement organizers in telling a new story about our economy, one that centers all people of color, to push for a bold, transformative policy platform that is really generated by those organizers, and to create more power. Matthew just talked about this, that we have to dedicate our time to figuring out how to wield our people power into political power. And that's what I'm so excited to talk to you all today, because all of the fights that you are talking about require us to be adamant and coalescing around real big policy fights. And I think right now, what we're seeing is a dire need to respond to immediate concerns, right? People are being evicted. People are being hospitalized. People are losing their jobs, right? And we know that Black people and Latinx people are disproportionately impacted by all of those things. From the work that we have seen from our vantage point, we feel like there's response needed, there's reimagining needed, and there's restructuring needed. And I think this moment calls on us to not only respond in imaginative ways, but think about how those responses lay the seeds for a restructured economy. And when we think about restructuring, we think about the economy in two ways at Liberation in a Generation. We think about dismantling economic oppression, and we think about building liberation. So one of the pieces that we always say is that racism right now is profitable. It has been tremendously profitable in the housing market, for example, to segregate Black people and Latinx people from wealthy, prosperous neighborhoods. It's been tremendously successful. And that in turn diminishes our economic power, right? And then when we don't have that economic power, it also impacts our political power. So now we're in these segregated communities. We might be represented by people of color, but do those people of color that we are putting in political office actually, are they able to represent our needs? Sometimes not. And then that means we don't have the power to actually change the rules by which corporations, these elite institutions, are actually making racism profitable. So we call this the cycle of oppression, that it keeps churning and churning. And we all have to figure out how to put a wedge in whatever part of that cycle we feel like is ours. And this cycle churns in the criminal justice system. This cycle churns in the housing system, like I just said. This cycle churns in our financial system, right? Lisa spoke a bit to it just now, and we can guarantee that the pieces that the federal government right now are putting in place will reinforce those cycles. So it's also up to us that as we are advocating for response, that we're also thinking about, well, how do we make sure that somebody's not getting rich off of this? I often think about reparations, for example, and I'm all for reparations. And I think about what would it mean for me to get a check. I am a African descendant of slaves, people who were enslaved. What would it mean for me to get a check? Well, until recently, I just paid off my student loan yesterday. Just paid off that, so I'm like, yay, yeah. But that check would have gone to pay off my student loan debt. That check would have gone right back into this cycle, right? So it's not that we shouldn't be doing everything. We almost have to do everything at once. And I know that sounds daunting, but we are all smart, capable people. And when we align, we are very powerful. So that's why we say we both have to dismantle the oppression economy and build a liberation economy. I'll end by just describing what's in that and what I really mean by that. So when I say dismantle the oppression economy, at Liberation in a Generation, we talk about ending the criminalization of people of color. That's ending the prison industrial complex, ending mass incarceration, and not criminalizing people with records, people with criminal backgrounds. In the oppression economy, we also have to recognize that there is currently a dual financial system. There is a financial system that makes wealth for people, and there is a financial system that just strips wealth from people, and specifically strips Black and Latinx and people of color of their wealth and builds the wealth of white folks. So we have to end that. We just have to end that. Actually, Angela Glover Blackwell and Michael McAfee just came out with an op-ed in the New York Times about banks paying and ending mortgage debt for Black people. Like, banks have that in their power. That is totally something banks could do tomorrow if they wanted to. Another two things that sometimes fly a little bit under the radar, and I will say the first one we're gaining more and more sharper momentum around, I think, in this nation, is ending the political suppression of people of color. So that's ending voter disenfranchisement, and making sure that we are building systems where people can easily vote. We see this over and over and over again. People are waiting in lines, but we're also seeing that political parties investing in Black people, investing in Latinx people when it's convenient for the vote, and not building the infrastructure, the organizational infrastructure that stays in communities after the election is done. There are some foundations working on that, I think, but we have a long way to go. And the fourth part about dismantling the oppression economy is just recognizing the role of corporations. And Mario and Matthew working on commercial linkage fees, I'm really interested in hearing more about your work there. We have been thinking about curbing corporate power in a couple of ways. One is about curbing the concentration of these corporations. So next week, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, the CEOs of those companies are going to a hearing in front of the judicial committee of the Judiciary Committee of the House. And we think it's imperative to understand what it means for Black and brown people when those corporations are concentrated and have concentrated wealth. I mean, Jeff Bezos makes $4.5 million an hour, I believe. And I don't even know, I can't even fathom like what you do with $4.5 million an hour, but like every hour, I don't even know that I can't really fathom what you do with all that money. But I can tell you that it harms the bargaining power of people of color as workers. It means that we pay more and are relegated to higher consumer prices. It means that we don't have, as a nation actually, but also Black and brown people in particular, don't have access to all kinds of media outlets, right? We have started to concentrate our media and our information. First and foremost, though, it also means that these corporations have outsized influence in our democracy. And so when I talk about that cycle of oppression, they have direct influence over the rules that regulate them. And you can imagine that they're trying to push in rules that favor them and their wealth. And I'm so excited to talk to Lisa, especially about, you know, what we're seeing in this COVID moment, because, you know, this corporate concentration is also pushing out Black innovation in the marketplace. It makes it very difficult to be an entrepreneur in the commercial space when you've got Amazon looming, and not treating its workers' rights, but also not treating the entrepreneurs that are selling products on that platform right. So one other quick thing, building a liberation economy, because that's all the stuff that we have to dismantle. Criminalization of people of color, dual financial system, curbing corporate power, ending political suppression of people of color. The other side is actually, what do we want to build? If we're getting rid of all that stuff, what are we trying to work towards? And we're trying to make sure that all people of color have their basic needs met. That might look like a guaranteed income. That might look like universal health care. That might look like access to clean and healthy water. We want to make sure that all people of color find safety and security in this economy so that all people are housed. We are big proponents and big fans of the homes guarantee that People's Action is moving forward. And we also think that, you know, college should be debt free. Imagine that. All contributions will be valued. Absolutely. Yeah, so all contributions will be valued. All contributions from people of color will be valued and compensated. So that means living wage. That means thinking about a federal jobs guarantee. If I want a job, I can go get a job. And that essentially we all belong. And I know that's a big thing here in the Bay Area, especially with the Belonging Institute. But it really makes sense in the economy that we find places where we're not constantly locked out of opportunity, and that we are not locking out people for criminal records, that we are not locking out people because they have immigrated from another country, that we're not locking out people because of gender and sexuality and just all of the ways that we have figured out how to like make sure that everybody isn't taking advantage of the wealth of this nation. So I'll stop there. And I really want to hear from other folks.
Right. So we're going to chime you in, but before I continue, speaking at the Belonging Institute and Belonging Circles, which is a huge PICO principle, Brother Reverend Ben McBride wanted to make sure that I said hello to you. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this dismantling in the housing realm. Mario and Matthew are working on this commercial linkage fee that is looking at how much is enough. And our response is there's no amount that's too much. But if we get this money, from what I understand and hearing you is, we will put it right back into the racist system and churn out the same processes. Am I hearing you correctly? So engage Mario and Matthew, talk more about the linkage fee, and then Solana, give your insight to what this means to Santa Clara and San Jose as a whole.
Yeah, I'll just turn it right over to Mario and Matthew. I'm really curious about how you see this as not only a response, but also a sort of a restructuring and maybe it's a gateway to restructuring how we're thinking about building affordable housing and funding affordable housing.
And before you start, Matthew and Mario, Jen or Sheila, if you could put in the chat box Solana's link, because she has some amazing models that she just broke down right off the top of her head so that the people can follow, because it's very complex, but yet simple at the same time and great information. So either put her link there or put the diagrams which she just eloquently expressed in the chat box. So Mario and Matthew, go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to follow after Solana right now. I just feel so inspired and motivated to take action on so many issues. And thank you so much for breaking it down on what it means to be able to dismantle these systems of oppression and thinking about a vision for a better tomorrow for everybody. And so we at Silicon Valley at Home are working on this policy campaign called the Commercial Linkage Fee. And the Commercial Linkage Fee is essentially inviting commercial developers to be part of the solution of addressing affordable housing crisis within the city of San Jose. There are a number of other jurisdictions within Santa Clara County that have adopted this fee. And the city of San Jose is one of the largest cities within the Bay Area that has yet to do so. And so since the dissolution of redevelopment agencies over 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, the city has not have a local source of funding for the production of affordable housing. And so our organization recently, and with the support of PACT SJ and their endorsement, we were very successful in passing a ballot measure here in the city of San Jose called Measure E, which is generating about $50 million a year for affordable housing. But even then, that's not enough to meet the demand of new housing stock that we critically need for low and moderate income renters and earners who are primarily Black and brown folks. And so this commercial development fee essentially says that we are going to levy a fee on a square footage, and then we're going to use that for affordable housing production. And so Matthew, you want to talk a little bit more about it specifically? Hello?
You can't hear?
Sure. That, that I think that's,
frozen.
am I frozen still or am I?
No, you're good.
Okay. I apologize. A lot of people on the same bandwidth here in my house. I think it's on the one hand, it's complicated. On the other hand, it's very simple. When we build jobs, we don't pay people enough to live in the city. And so we need to figure out how to claw back some of that progress and put it back into stabilizing communities. I think the one thing that's been very clear over the its lifetimes, but particularly in the last 8 years, is that if you add a lot of jobs and you don't build housing that's affordable to folks, you're going to have a crisis. And I don't want to oversell the commercial linkage fee. We see it really as one of a number of really critical tools that are in a local toolbox to figure out how to respond to need and stabilize communities. It's been a long time coming in San Jose. This is not the easiest time to have this discussion, but Reverend Ray is correct. There's a tremendous impact of growth, and the question is, how do we respond to the needs that are created by that growth in a way that is equitable and just responsive to the reality of what it takes to maintain a stable city and stable communities. And really, you look at it, it's not clear how the economy works. Now, Solana, that might be kind of a moment for you to jump in and solve the problem. So I don't want to underestimate but really, we're in an unsustainable position, and this is not going to fix things, but it is part of the solution. And we really feel like it's an obligation of the city to make this commitment as it tries to promote growth in the city for all the reasons that you laid out. So it's not enough, but it's an important part of the process.
So Solana, how do we dismantle this model opposed to reinfusing this fee back into a racist system that perpetuates further racism?
Yeah, I often and look, everything that we are doing is necessary. Like I think we, even when it's insufficient, we have to keep doing, even if we say, if we would look back and we're like, oh, that wasn't the right thing, we had to be doing it. So I never say like, don't pursue anything, because I'm like, unless it's like very obvious that it's detrimental to people of color. But what I really like thinking about is both the upstream and the downstream in this, right? So you have this commercial linkage fee. It's going to be, hopefully it'll pass. We'll have a whole new set of money for commercial development, but for affordable housing development. So what are we thinking about upstream? And Matthew, you hit the nail on the head. Corporations need to be paying people more money. This is essentially the problem, right? That if we're not going to say like everybody gets housing, then we need to make sure that corporations are being held accountable. So I think the idea of you all organizing and being in coalition with the folks that are really holding the feet to the fire of these corporations is really important. And then I think about like downstream, like when all this money comes in, do you have the people in place, the zoning in place, the planning in place, the everything like ready, so that money just soars in and creates affordable housing? Now, of course, yes, I think to your point, Reverend Ray, the system as it is of developing affordable housing is not great, right? There's all kinds of upstream stuff we have to do there as well. But we are talking about getting people housed. And I'm really curious about how this new housing, even in and of itself, could rethink and restructure how we think about affordable housing. So is it more sustainable in terms of the funding mechanisms that keep the places maintained? Can we make sure that people are staying in these places? Are they growing equity? Just things like that. They're questions. They're not like, this is what you need to do. They're really questions about how do we start to break apart the cycle, both upstream, paying people what they deserve, but also thinking about what is the model of affordable housing that we're really aiming for as we're still housing people. Those are my thoughts.
Can I just say something too? Can I add something?
Absolutely, Lisa.
These corporations are making billions of dollars off of people in Silicon Valley. You just gave a quote of Jeff Bezos. Why aren't they being held accountable? They're creating the jobs. They're bringing people to the Valley. I was a recruiter for Lockheed Martin for 17 years. And so, you have to pay a premium to live in Silicon Valley. And a lot of the engineers and people that we were trying to bring from different parts of the country could not afford to live here. And so why aren't these corporations that are making money off of the backbone of this state, why aren't they contributing more dollars to housing and funding that piece? You got Google downtown San Jose. They're putting in some money downtown San Jose. I haven't been following it closely, but I live here, right? And so BART's being expanded because of transportation to and from the San Francisco Bay Area. There's money out there. And I'm wondering, I haven't been following, I apologize, I haven't been following the housing initiatives, but there's money out there in the universe to be tapped. And let's change the narrative. Let's change the rules from how we've been doing something, right? To let's create some new rules and make these corporations more accountable, not just increase the salaries, but make a contribution to the housing. Has anything been done with that?
Well, in San Jose, Santa Clara, during the primary, we're heading on the right track. And using Solana's language, we need to create policies that pin down stakeholders. Measure E was passed, which will infuse a significant amount of money for homelessness, houselessness, and affordable housing. Coming up in the November ballot, we have Schools and Communities First, which seeks to change Prop 15 for property taxes that can be used to enhance our communities. We're talking about the commercial linkage fee And then we're talking about the reversal of the discriminatory affirmative action bill, as we call it, that was rescinded back when Governor Wilson was governor. So we have all of these different pools of potential money to create and generate wealth for Black and Brown communities. So these are some things that we'll be talking about. These are some things that we'll be pushing. So let's pivot a little bit to small businesses. Lisa, we're grateful you're here. African-American women, business entrepreneurs are skewed in this market, as you already know. So, I mean, how do we help them survive? Buy Black campaign, support small businesses and entrepreneurs as you. And then Solana can give you a reflection based on deliberation and generations and how that model works within this particular area.
This is crazy because in the midst of this pandemic, it's like we have to be creative and innovative and come up with something new. But this is an economic issue, right? I have this issue with, I'm gonna digress for a second. I have an issue with begging corporations to give Black and Brown people jobs. We have enough creativity in the universe to create our own jobs and our own corporations. If we pull coalitions together, our resources together, our talent, and pull coalitions together, we can create our own economic basis, right? We can create our own funding sources. We talked about collective, there's cooperatives in the San Francisco Bay Area. Solana, you know about that. Matthew's shaking his head. We have very few Afrocentric, diverse cooperatives where people can be trained to create their own businesses and their own resources. We're trained with this individualistic mentality to have our own instead of pulling our resources together to help one another build. So Black and Brown women of color, diverse women of color, since we're speaking to that piece, I'm looking at initiatives and ways where we can create, we have this bad word going around, susus, right? But we have, you guys are familiar with susus? We'll talk about that. But we have, about crowdfunding, right? Crowdfunding, the Jobs Act. And that was a way for small businesses and entrepreneurs to raise funding for their businesses, right? Independent of grants and loans and stuff like that. But some of those you have to pay back, but that's one method. And so we need to look at creative, innovative, economic ways to raise funding. I hate loans. I'm not an advocate of loans and federal loans and funding, and I did not apply for the PPP in the EIDL grant. And of course, that's a personal preference. I know some people that did, and I know some people that said they had businesses, but we need to create innovative resources. There's a lot of smiling. We need to create new capital, design, architectural funding structures for our communities, for our small businesses, where we can be sustainable and survive, because we are the backbone of this economy. I was reading following a guy in Las Vegas, and he said African Americans spent $70 billion in December of 2019 on consumerism. We are the largest consumers in the United States. Our money stays in the system for 6 hours compared to other races. Why? Because of our conditioning and our mindset. If we change our mindset, which is a process, I'm learning to change mine. That's why I'm here today. If we learn how to come together collectively, pull our resources together collectively and build from there, we could have a chance, build our own. I heard George Fraser on Facebook the other day. He said something that was so profound to me, and you guys know this, but we say it differently. It's called economic sovereignty. We need economic sovereignty for Black folks. We need financial literacy. We need to build our own resources internally. And the resources are in the universe, Rev. They're here, right? We have to change the mindset with PAC and Solana's group and Mario's group and all of our resources, and come together and say, let's come together collectively and build our economic power base and use the tools that we already have and create new ones. So that's kind of how my mindset is. Is it impossible? I don't know.
Hey, there's rigor in everything that we must do. So Solana, speak to that. What in liberation and generation type of creative policies that support entrepreneurs like Lisa and others like herself?
Yeah, you know, one thing that we consistent, and my co-founder and I, Jeremy, we came from Prosperity Now that used to be called the Center for Economic Development, right? It was like entrepreneurial CFED. I don't even remember.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, I've worked on issues of entrepreneurial ecosystems in Detroit and Atlanta. And I think what's so interesting is that, and, you know, we just commemorated the Tulsa massacre, right? I think what's hard for me, and I think what's hard for me is that sometimes not sometimes, but too often when we build our own, that we get eaten up. we get eaten up. And I think that, and we get torn down and burned down and killed. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do our own. I think it has to be in parallel and in partnership with interrupting these cycles, the macro cycles that we
disrupting.
Yes.
Yeah.
The macro cycles that we have to be involved in. So I was working in Atlanta, for example, and I was saying, you know, as Black entrepreneurs, we've got to make sure that we're providing a living wage for people. And which is absolutely true, right? Because we're more likely to hire Black folks, and we want to make sure that we're paying people, right? And so one of the service providers said, yeah, but that would put them at an unfair advantage, right? Or disadvantage, rather. They would put them at an unfair disadvantage, because not only are they competing in a market with other folks that are not paying living wage. So it is sort of like, where do we disrupt in this cycle? How do we both build our individual economic empowerment, but also recognize that we're working in this macro economy that has forces on us as well? And I'm actually really curious about, from your perspective, what members have been saying about the coronavirus relief programs, the paycheck protection program, because I think this is a great example of, if we just build on the current systems, we're going to get the same exact outcomes, right? If we depend on the fact that people have to have a business relationship with an existing bank in order to even qualify, like, that is not a reality for Black, and I can't really speak for Latinx entrepreneurs, but like, that is not a reality for a lot of Black entrepreneurs. So I'm just really curious about how that program has been playing out for your members, or if
it
at all.
Hasn't. And again, going back to an equitable playing field for, we're focusing on Black female entrepreneurs, right? Because we don't have the same resources, but the government contracting or government guidelines for small micro businesses is $250,000. The average home-based business is making $50,000 or less. There's no equity there. Those $250,000, those businesses in the $250,000 space, they can afford CPAs and accountants to go fill out that paperwork for the funding for PPP and EIDLs. They understand the government lingo in the complexities and how to fill out that information. People in my space at $50,000 or less, I don't know how to fill out those forms. I'm
Right.
not an economist, pastor, or, I don't have an economics background, or I'm not a tax person that knows how to fill out the forms. And and so people in my space are reluctant to fill out those forms, even though everybody
Right.
says, oh, it's so easy, it's so easy. But we don't know, we've never been in this space before. So we don't know the long-term impact. So if I fill out the PPP and the government gives me, or the banks give me $20,000, and I spend all that money on my, hiring employees or paying the mortgage or whatever, is there a guarantee that that money is going to be forgiven? Well, they say if you follow the rules and the guidelines, but nobody's gotten their money forgiven yet, right?
Yeah.
And some people are giving that money back because they don't want to deal with whatever the ramifications are down the way. Well, the EIDL funding is a loan, right? And it's what, 10 years or something like that you have to pay back. That's a little bit more flexible versus the PPP loan and the way it's set up. I think PPP is 2 years. EIDL is like 10 years, and it starts at like 1% or something for a year or something like that. And so literally you're paying like $60, $70 a month. That's pretty good. But if my business is not doing well, right, and I don't have any employees to help me, and most of the small businesses, micro businesses, have one person like me
Right. Okay.
doing all the work, and we're losing our minds. So
Yeah.
I may not have a job. A lot of people have primary jobs and they have side gigs.
Right.
So
And I'm
your
also-
situation,
I'm also just curious about just what, you mentioned working at the state level, what are the things that you're pushing for? And
So-
do you see that as a pathway to restructuring how entrepreneurs are having to navigate through this economy?
So what's happening is that because of COVID, the governor's office, his small biz and economic entrepreneurial department, in the last couple of months, they've had several series of meetings to target minority small businesses and Black businesses. And the chambers have gotten together, and everybody's gotten together to talk about what resources are available, how they're handling the PPP funding, the EIDL funding, and what are the next steps. The governor's office has set up a website for resources, and they're building partnerships. ODOS is one of the partners with the governor's office. When small businesses need resources and information, they can come to us, and I would have to direct them back to the state, or I'm creating a database of resources for people as well. And so the Renaissance Center has a consultant helping with the PPP application process, right? But people aren't signing up. So the governor's office is trying to figure out, how do we deal with this situation? There's grants, the chambers have grants, funding, PPP funding and stuff like that, but a lot of African-American businesses small businesses don't want to deal with that. They're reticent to deal with that. And so in the interim, the state is trying to rally and pull in, resources and partner with these small CBOs and organizations. Same thing with Department of General Services. We're going to be a partner with Department of General Services. We've done some webinars with SBA and PTAC, around government contracts and stuff like that to provide education and awareness. But everybody's still trying to figure this stuff out and create partners to target those small businesses that don't know about economic development programs, or don't go to the Black chambers or the Hispanic chambers because they're working full time trying to take care of their families. And so we go to the communities. We did a conference in East Palo Alto last March on the eve of the pandemic. I was telling Rev about it earlier, and we had phenomenal panelists and speakers, we had about 100 women show up on the eve of the pandemic when everything was shutting down, because they wanted to see what kind of information was available if they wanted to get into a business, or if they already had a business, what kind of resources are out here. And so, but
So
the government's trying to figure this out, right?
good. So I think the lack of resources, individuals trying to do all of the work by themselves, creates a further economic divide. So a destruction and dismantling of a difficult system that is challenging to enter seeks to speak to the policies that Solana talks about, a completely reimagining and deconstruction of the system.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask Mario and Matthew, we're talking about economic divide and the housing. What do you see happening if we can't get a sufficient commercial linkage fee relational to Black, Latinx, and Vietnamese communities and other communities that are oppressed? What do you see happening?
Yeah, so we're still grappling with the effects of the legacy of redlining, right? And we're still trying to address that as much as possible. As we talk about like racial wealth gap and equity and being able to build that up. And if we look back to 2008, when the economic recession hit, the folks who were the most affected were Black and Latinx folks who were losing their homes because they were succumbing to predatory subprime mortgages. And so that needed to be addressed. And there were a number of things that were fixed on that regard, but how do you recuperate from that particular instance? And so when we think about this particular pandemic that we're in, where many of the folks are losing their jobs or having a reduced income, now they're having to pay, accumulate rent debt. And at the end of like, when all of this is over, how are they gonna be able to pay back the rent that they owe? And that's going to be a big issue that we're going to have to grapple with in the next couple of months. And how do we get leverage the federal and state government and the private sector to help address that issue, because they're not going to be able to have the financial resources to be able to do that. And that's why we're starting to hear phrases like the eviction time bomb, because people are not going to have the financial resources to be able to pay back the rent that they owe. And right now they're estimating about 44,000 residents alone would be affected here in Santa Clara County. That's a big number, and that's only going to increase if we don't have a local source like a commercial linkage fee over the next, we estimate at Silicon Valley Home that over the next 5 to 10 years, we stand to gain approximately $700 million for affordable housing. And that will be, as Matthew mentioned, a part of the economic recovery efforts. It won't be the solution, but it'll definitely help mitigate the significant impact that we need to be bracing ourselves for. And so that's why we continue to advocate for more additional funding, both at the local level, but at the regional level, because it's not just symptomatic to the South Bay. It's happening in the city, in San Francisco, the Peninsula, the East Bay, and the North Bay, and even across the state of California. And so we're really looking forward to continuing to support eviction moratoriums as much as we can, and then thinking about how do we address the accumulation of rent debt and address that moving forward with public-private partnerships. So that we are able to maintain folks housed as much as possible, but also think about, on a parallel track, building more affordable housing so that we remove overcrowding in households and people are able to become self-sufficient at that point. Matthew, you're muted again.
I'm sorry. 2 quick points. According to our calculations, if everybody in San Jose was paying what they could afford, about 30% of their income, there would be an extra $1 billion every year circulating in the local economy. That's much more profound in communities in which people are paying 50, 60, 70% of their income. That's money that doesn't go to local businesses owned by folks in the community. People are working just to keep a roof over their head. And so when we talk about community resilience, part of why affordable housing is part of that is it creates opportunities for a different kind of growth to be occurring in communities right now that are just struggling to stay afloat. I want to echo Mario and point out that we learned a lesson in 2008, right? There was a huge, like a catastrophic loss of generations of resources, particularly in communities of color that were invested in those homes, which was supposed to, you know, that that was supposed to be how it worked, and then it just poof. We're looking at this again. This isn't just a hard time for renters. There are homeowners that have scraped and you know, maybe generationally handed down homes, and you know, there's a real threat right now in this economy. And the last time all of that wealth basically disappeared, it did disappear, it left the community. And so I think it's really important, and I appreciated Reverend Ray, your staff shared some information that we acknowledge that this is a speculative moment for outsiders to come in and
Yeah.
I you know, the nice word is to reap the benefits of other people's misery. And so I think being cognizant of that and knowing that the folks that make money off of this are the people that collect fees out of the crisis, right? That the ripple effects of people losing their homes are crazy. So we need to really be conscious of this moment, and you know, for us, it's been looking at how do we share information to people who don't know how to take advantage of the laws that are there in theory to protect them from a balloon mortgage payment that they may face in a couple of months. But also, what, you know, how do we bring resources in to make sure that we're keeping these housing assets in the community? These are not simple questions. I would love to hear Solana's response, but we're conscious of this. We've seen it before. Again, we can't pretend that we don't know that it's not something that we know that we're looking at. And so big challenges ahead, but we know where the challenges are, and so we need to be focused.
Absolutely, Matthew. And just for our viewers live on Facebook and Zoom, in the chat box, you can find Otis information for Lisa. You can find Silicon Valley at home information relational to the commercial linkage fee. And then you can also find Liberation and Generation, Solana's information. So as I mentioned earlier, you have Prop 16 that's going to be on the ballot, which reverses the anti-discriminatory practices of people of color. That is with grants and things of that nature. That will help decrease the economic divide. Schools and Communities First, Prop 15, will bring in additional money. It'll take 3 to 4 years for that money to reach the communities. You have the Measure E that was passed in San Jose that's going to bring in additional revenue. So Solana, I've given you this revenue, right? And we're going to deconstruct this system and not put in the good money that we passed these effective laws on back into a discriminatory system so that it further increases the racial divide, the economical divide. How do we move forward with this new money?
Yeah. This is where I am so pleased that I don't have to come up with these answers, that the people that we work with, the organizers that we work with on a day in and day out basis, they have the answers to what's best for their communities. We help try to make those into legislative and policy reality, right? So for example, we've been having a really great conversation with Californians for a New Communities for a New California in the Central Valley. And, you know, they so interestingly talk about, you know, where does this money go in our communities when the money is going to be controlled by people who don't necessarily have our interests, our best interest in mind, and don't necessarily have the best interest of Black and Brown people in their communities at mind. And so then it becomes a question of, well, one, what do they want to see the money go towards? And then how do they build the power necessary to convince those people that control those resources? And so actually, we don't have a prescription about because there are many groups that have great ideas about how to change and where to actually invest. And that's what Liberation in a Generation is built to do, is to help groups like PAC, like the Dream Defenders, like CNC in the Central Valley, like Inland Empire United, to figure out, okay, let's dream. If we are going to have $5 billion or however much money, where is that really going to go? And are there systems that we actually need to build? Like, are there things that we actually don't have that there isn't even a precedent for? So that's some of the work that we've been doing, is literally thinking about, especially with the defund the police conversation, right? Like, people are saying, okay, if we don't have money in the police budget, then where does that money go? And I think, absolutely mental health services, absolutely, more supports inside of schools as opposed to police inside of schools. But also, like, we need to be thinking about what beyond the budgets that we're dealing with, because it's almost like a little bit like a shell game. We actually, like, the needs that we have are beyond any one city budget, beyond any one county budget. And so I think as soon as we say we want the city to do this and we want the county to do this, we should also be ready to call out our representatives at the federal level, our 2 representatives and our senators, and obviously our president, on what the federal government's response should be. And it's not yelling into the wind, because we have to say it. Like, we have to keep saying it no matter who is there. And if who is there is not listening, then we need to change who is there. And that's where we build the people power in order to get who is there. And then once they get in there, we have to keep supporting them, right? We can't just say, Matthew, you mentioned 2008. We can't say, like, we got a president that looks like us, we're done. Yay, we did it. Like, nope, we got to keep holding feet to the fire.
Excellent. So it doesn't matter how much money we have, which hopefully in the next general election, we'll make some great decisions around school and communities first, the commercial linkage fee, et cetera. But we must hold those stakeholders and electeds feet to the fire to make sure that they are thinking, of reimagining or deconstructing to create social justice and decrease the economic divide. So thank you for that share. So our time is exhausted. You all are amazing, but I want to give each one of you 60, no, I say 30 seconds. I have to, because you guys are like Baptist preachers. You'll get 30 seconds to make a whole sermon out of it. So give us, start with Lisa, give us 30 words of departing relational to our conversation today.
I can keep it simple. Collective economics, collaboration, building collaborative, collective coalitions. We've been through this before, so we need to create something new, the new paradigm shift. So maybe we can start here in building together and pulling others in to come up with new, creative, innovative ideas to try and fix some of this stuff. That's my nutshell. That's where my head is thinking, creating new ideas, because we've done it before. We've been through this before.
Yes, I like that. That's going to take
Thank
moral
you.
courage. Yeah, that's going to take moral courage, right? It's not for the faint of heart.
Absolutely.
I think Matthew or Mario said this is not easy. This takes work. This takes a collaborative effort to reimagine something that we've never done before. Mario, give us your words.
Yeah, I do work for an affordable housing advocacy organization, but this entire conversation has really just laser focus. What I've already been thinking for the past couple of months is that November 3rd can't come soon enough. have a new president and someone that prioritizes affordable housing funding and that is able to really take leadership to try to address the issues that we're all facing across the country. We're trying to fight for rent relief from the federal government, and we're not getting that. And so, we really need someone in the White House that's really going to be that champion for us for affordable housing and for addressing the issue of homelessness in the U.S.
Thank you, Mario. And thank you so much for your commitment and dedication to our community. We are better because of you. Thank you. Matthew.
Yeah, this has been a really valuable discussion. I needed this. There is a lot of hope and spirit here, and that I need more of that to get me through each week. So I would say accountability and responsibility, holding folks that say that they're representing the community and have interests at stake is really going to be critical. In this moment, thinking big, we're talking about eliminating single family zoning in San Jose. It's a beginning of a conversation, but the focus needs to be on how that's about opportunity, and it's not just an abstract planning decision. And finally, and this is the only thing that I have to hold on to, is that each little piece, if I can hold on to it and figure out why it leverages something bigger, then it makes my work meaningful. And I think that's just an important thing in the moment. I agree we could use change in leadership, but we have to figure out how to leverage each of the small wins that we make.
Thank you, Matthew. And again, thank you for your collective work in our community. And because of you, we are a better and we have a bright future ahead. Solana Rice.
Dream. We're aiming for a liberation economy that we've never seen in this world. We've never, ever, we're trying to build something we've never seen, we've never operated in. So as we have these wins that Matthew and Mario and Lisa are talking about, and making sure that they accumulate, we must have a vision for what they accumulate to, so that every win we know, okay, we didn't win our full thing, but we know where we're going, and everybody knows where we're going, where we're really headed. I think that's incredibly important, and that vision should be rooting out all the places where racism is profitable. And we've just got to find ways to support one another in the short term and in that long-term vision. So yes, absolutely, we've got to respond to the crisis, and we want to make sure that we're heading to that restructuring vision to a liberation economy.
Love it. Thank you so much, Solana. Thank you, Lisa, Mario, Matthew. You guys have been amazing. To our viewers, as I mentioned, check out the chat box on Facebook Live and Zoom. We have all of their information. Much of this rich conversation can be captured. And also remember, you can review it. There's so much information and so much wisdom in this with this panel that it's kind of hard to contain all at once. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank all of those who have stuck with us on Facebook Live at the Justice Project. We are 12 strong. So we are grateful for all that have come. So I want to remind you, get out to vote. Registration right now. Make sure you're registered, because when October 1st comes and we can first submit our mail-in ballots, we want to be ahead of the game. Know what the policies are. Know what Prop 16 means, 15, schools and communities first. Get understanding about the commercial linkage fee and what it can do for our community. And don't be afraid to reimagine. Don't be afraid, as Solana tells us, to think differently. Create something that has never happened before. Policies that create a strong social economic system for Black, Brown, our Latinx, our Vietnamese, for all who have not benefited in our social economic system that has been under the umbrella of many racist systemic policies. So again, voting is our strongest weapon. And don't forget, I want you to contact at least 10 of your friends and ask them, have they completed their census? So that's 5 of us here. So I think my math says that's at least 50 folks that we're going to talk to and ask them if they completed their census. And as a reminder, this Sunday, PACT, along with many other community leaders, will be convening at City Hall at 2 p.m. And we will be having a rally that will be one collective rally as we look at the idea of reimagining policing, and you get to hear from many of your community leaders and multi-faith leaders about their ideas of reimagining and their ask and commitment of you, the community of San Jose and Santa Clara County. And then the PAC assembly for our PAC family. Our assembly is also on the 26th at 6 p.m. So we want to make sure that you register. And last but not least, there is a rally at City Hall on Friday. That's tomorrow at 5 p.m. in honor of C.T. Vivian and John Lewis. The march will start at City Hall and end at the Cesar Chavez Plaza in San Jose. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us here with the Justice Project. So join us again next week for future justice movement to create economic equality and empowerment that stabilizes our community. So thank you again, and don't forget, come out, register for the rally on our PAC Facebook page. You can view it live on Facebook or Zoom. All you have to do is register. So go to our PAC Facebook page and you'll see information about the community rally and reimagining public safety. So again, thank you everyone, and I really appreciate your time.